State of origin: Queensland versus New South Wales, Maroons versus Blues, Cane Toads versus Cockroaches. It's the biggest rivalry in Australian sport. Each year, the best players of rugby league from their respective states play off in a 3-game series with some of the biggest hits and the best plays of the sport, which are seen to Australian viewers. Interestingly, a similar so-called rivalry emerged in the Australian music scene throughout the mid to late 90s all the way through to the mid 2000s. This was between the country's two biggest alternative rock bands, Powderfinger from Queensland and Silverchair from New South Wales. Both bands followed an almost paralleled path to success in Australia, and fans of Australian music were locked into heated debates as to which band was better. Now that the dust has settled on both of these groups' careers, I think we can look back and assess how great they both were, and remember that they weren't actually rivals but just friends in the Australian music industry with many similarities. No better evidence of their friendship came than their joint 2007 Across the Great Divide tour, where they ventured to every corner of the country to perform to adoring fans together. I still think it would be great fun to finally settle this debate though. Of the two amazing Australian rock bands in question, which one actually is better? Well, if we had to decide, I thought a 5-round battle to the top would be a great way to work it out. So I have 5 categories, and the band that wins the most takes the title. The categories include 1. Albums, 2. Singles, 3. Awards, 4. Influence on Australian culture, and 5. Live shows. Let's kick it off. Okay, albums. Well, both bands had pretty consistently great albums. I think the first thing that comes to mind is the Triple J Hottest 100 Australian Albums of All Time vote in 2011, where Silverchair's Frog Stomp came in at number 2, and Powderfinger's Odyssey number 5 came in at number 1. That shows that the Australian public loved both of these bands so much for their albums. That same poll had 4 Powderfinger albums in the list, and it also included all 5 Silverchair albums. To me, that might be a tipping point. Silverchair are, in my opinion, one of the very few bands in the world that have an album discography made up of all great albums and no misfires. I know some hardcore grunge era fans don't like anything they did in the new millennium, but to say their last 2 albums are bad is pretty harsh. They're just different sounding from what they started like. Powderfinger, on the other hand, started shaky with their debut record, Parables for Wooden Ears, which by their own admission is a bit of a mess. They struck gold on their next few records though, and finished a little slow with their last 2. Overall, I'm gonna have to go with my boys from Newey, Silverchair, on this one for their consistency. Category 2 is singles. Once again, it's close. Powderfinger had 4 top 10 ARIA singles and topped 2 separate Triple J Hottest 100s for their songs These Days and My Happiness. That's going to be hard to beat. Silverchair actually had 9 songs reach the top 10 of the ARIA charts, but never topped a Triple J Hottest 100. I think another key factor here with singles is to think about lasting legacy. If we look at some other charts that show their relevance to the Australian public in the present, it can help us to understand who comes out on top in this category. Let's take Triple M's Ozzest 100, which was a vote for the greatest Australian song of all time. Silverchair featured twice, with Straight Lines at 74 and Tomorrow at 36. Powderfinger 3 times, with Baby I've Got You on My Mind at 97, These Days 77, and My Happiness at 31. The most recent Triple J legacy vote in 2013 for the hottest 100 of the past 20 years had Powderfinger's These Days and My Happiness at 8 and 10 respectively, Silverchair's Tomorrow, Freak, and Straight Lines all behind Powderfinger's offerings. It's a close one, but I think I'm going to have to go with the Queenslanders in Powderfinger and say My Happiness and These Days are just too big of a match for any in particular Silverchair song. That ties it up 1-1. Category 3, we have awards. Now, there are many music awards out there, but for these 2 bands, I'm happy to concentrate on one particular award that they have both featured in heavily, and that is the ARIA Awards. These 2 bands are 2 of the top 3 ARIA Award winners of all time, and they consistently duked it out when they released music for the biggest accolades. So Powderfinger 3 times won Album of the Year and twice Song of the Year. Silverchair only once, for some weird reason, won Album of the Year and twice Song of the Year. Overall, Powderfinger have won 18 ARIAs, and Silverchair have taken 2021 Spiky Towers home, which is an equal highest with John Farnham. Again, it's a tough one, but I'm gonna have to go with Silverchair for their greater number of wins, even though Powderfinger have taken the major honour twice more. I consider Silverchair to be pretty stiff not to win at least one other time anyway. Also, can I just add that these two bands need to be inducted into the Hall of Fame already? Seriously, how did Human Nature make it in before them? I actually did hear Daniel Johns on his podcast say that he was asked but declined it because he only wanted to be in after he died. Okay, so we are at Silverchair 2, Powderfinger 1. The fourth category is influence on Australian culture. So this is an interesting one because you don't necessarily equate these two bands with Aussie culture as much as say you would with Midnight Oil or Cold Chisel, but they are still both definitely quintessentially Australian. My first thought about Silverchair though is that they never really delved into Australian culture in their artistic display. This is by no means a bad thing though, it just means that they might be less remembered as an Australian band as Powderfinger might be. The Fingers dipped their toes into Australian culture a few times with some of their work. Their third album, Internationalist, tackled issues surrounding negative perception of immigration to Australia, in particular with their song The Day You Come. The band stated it as being a response to some particular comments made by right-wing politician Pauline Hanson and her eyebrow-raising stance on the issue. Also, their song Like a Dog from Odyssey touched on issues surrounding the treatment of Indigenous Australians. Lastly, I'd also say their song Baby I've Got You on My Mind has become a bit of an Australian pump-up song for some big events, almost akin to a song like We Are the Champions. For these reasons, I will have to square the ledger at 2-2 and say this one goes to Powderfinger. So the last and deciding category is live shows. Once again, another tough one. Both of these bands played some epic live performances. Some that have come to mind are Silverchair's MTV Awards in 1995 when they were just little kids. Powderfinger played the AFL Grand Final once, and they also played some huge farewell shows when they called it a day around 2010. I think this one might come down to a bit of a personal preference for the individual, and I can only go off things I've seen on TV or on the web because I never actually got an opportunity to see either of these bands live. It's a tough call, but from what I've seen online, I'd have to say Silverchair. I think it boils down to some of their more iconic performances to the Australian public. This includes the ARIA Awards in 1995 with Tim Rogers, their performance in 2002 when Daniel was sick but still smashed it out, and their epic Sound Relief comeback in 2005. Also, Daniel Johns as a performer is literally one of a kind. He's an incredible musician and was actually a brilliantly charismatic frontman, not to mention also a killer guitarist. That doesn't take away from how great Bernard Fanning is though. But at the end of the day, I've got to go with the guys from New South Wales, Silverchair. So there you have it. That means Silverchair take it out, 3-2. I know many people have their personal preference, but I'll leave my assessment with you to digest, and you can share with me in the comments who you think wins this State of Origin battle. So who do you think is better, Powderfinger from Queensland or Silverchair from New South Wales?